Bom dia a todas e todos, me ouvem bem? Obrigado. Eu gostaria de, então, iniciar essa palestra, apresentando o palestrante, que é o Cédrik Fermont. O Cédrik é um compositor, músico, engenheiro de som, autor, pesquisador independente, organizador de concertos, curador. E o Cédrik, ele atua no campo do noise, da música experimental e eletrônica desde 1989. Ele nasceu no Zaire, na República Democrática do Congo, e mora em Berlim. Ele morou na Bélgica e na Holanda. E o Cédrik é um grande conhecedor e um autor trabalha e escreve sobre música experimental e noise da Ásia e da África. Ele dirige um label chamado Cipher, que também é um site. Ele tem um programa de rádio na rádio Stahlplatt, Achtung Art 4 Collabor Radio e Box Audio, todas da Alemanha, e membros de bandas como Axiom, Tazil Muhared, Cédrik Fermont, mais Maria Nashi, Salim Salom, Ambre e muitas outras. O Cédrik tem ele estudou percussão orquestral, teatro, declamação e canto. E ele está na cena de música industrial e de nós desde 99, como já disse. Estudou música eletroacústica no Conservatório de Mons, Bélgica. Estudou muitas outras coisas, segundo o seu próprio site, arte contemporânea, silkscreen, etc. E eu acho que é interessante fazer uma lista aqui dos diversos labels em que ele participou. Os nomes são significativos, então vou me ater a eles. Cipher, Antzen, Ad Noisium, Hush Hush, Independenza Records, Puzzling Records, Textolux, Clan Galerie, Old Europa Café, Entity Records, Shanshui, Deaf Blind Dumb School, Audio Trauma, Sub Rosa, Riemann Records, etc. Ele tem alguns textos importantes, como A Radical Story of Noise Music from Indonesia, com o pesquisador Dimitri Delafelle, Towards a Decolonization of a History of Electronic Music, e outros. Eu vou falar rapidamente. O trabalho do Cédrik trata de uma perspectiva, trabalho acadêmico, de uma perspectiva decolonial da música eletrônica. E eu vou iniciar a conversa com ele e vou passar a palavra para ele em inglês a partir desse ponto. So, Cédrik, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Cédrik. It's very nice to have you here. I was talking about your activities as musician and as well as a researcher, especially in the field of your approach with the decolonization of electronic music in Asia and in Africa, which you have in long effort, academic effort as author as well as a musician. And So I was talking about that with people in Portuguese, and well, I'm glad to have you here. Many thanks for your presentation at Advance, and I'd like to pass the microphone to you. Thank you,
All
Cédric.
right. Thank you too, and hello everyone. Good morning for many of you. So where the presentation has been done, so I can start. So today we speak about some similarities between Asia, Africa, Latin America, but also differences for sure. And I will play some music extracts also to put things a bit into context. So, as previously said, I did a lot of research regarding Asia and Africa. Latin America less. First, because I haven't been there yet. It's going to come in January, February. Second, because a lot of work has been already done also regarding Latin America. I guess many of you know the work of Ricardo da Alfara from Argentina, and the database that he's been putting online via the Fondation Langlois, which is a pretty amazing work. So to speak about similarities, we all know that Latin America, Africa, Asia have been colonized mostly by Western entities, especially Portugal, Spain, France, the UK, well, at least England, the British Empire, and at a lower extent, a few other parts of the world like Belgium, and not only. So in that sense, there are some similarities in the history, the violent history, but also how technology and part of the culture and the modern culture and modern art have been brought to those three regions, or and not only those three regions. We could often extend to other native cultures, whether it is in North America or in Australia, New Zealand, or even some parts of Europe, for example. So my work for about 2 decades now, has been to try to share what I learn about what happened in Asia and in Africa, and more, because I'm still discovering what happened in Latin America regarding electroacoustic music, sound art, music concrete, and electronic music in general. Because despite the fact that most of us have internet right now and access to an enormous amount of documents and knowledge, despite the fact that composers have been traveling for a very long time, probably 100 years or more, in the West at least, and part of other parts of the world, the knowledge about what happened and still what happens in most parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America is still very, very small, which is to me very problematic. So if you read most books that speak about history of electroacoustic and electronic music in general, most of them will start with composers such as John Cage in the USA, and Schaeffer in France, and Stockhausen in Germany, and so on and so forth, they will rarely start with other composers, with very few exceptions, like Russolo in Italy, who wrote this essay about noise music, his vision of noise music in 1913, and built instruments to make noise. But you very rarely, and almost never, I would say, see names of composers who don't come from Western Europe and North America. And I really say Western Europe because, in the end, the history, or a history of sound art and electroacoustic music from Eastern Europe, sorry, is also not always well represented. It's documented, not perfectly, but there are many documents about what happened in the Soviet Union, in Czechoslovakia, in Poland, in Yugoslavia, and so on. But if you study in a Western university or academy or conservatory, most of the time you learn very, very little about what happened over there, apart maybe from Leon Theremin, for example. Even though the Soviet avant-garde was very active during the 1920s and 30s, and a bit less in the 40s because of the war, of course, in the field of sound art and synthetic and electronic music. So no need to say how badly it is documented regarding non-Western countries and geographies, culture. Even though sound art, electroacoustic music, electronic music, you name it, is a form of art and culture that appeared in many places more or less at the same time, thanks to technology, the advancements of technology, and thanks to the fact that many composers got the opportunity to travel, to exchange, and also to build studios in Latin America, and in Asia, as parts of Asia, especially. In Africa, this is a bit of a different history, and it came a bit later. But nevertheless, I still find it shocking that if I enter a university in Belgium or in the USA or in Germany, most of this non-Western history is not documented or is barely mentioned. In fact, you maybe get a few names, and like Halim El-Dabh in Egypt, because for now 10 or 15 years he's finally recognized as one of the pioneers of music concrete and electroacoustic music from Egypt. But he's he's one of the very, very few exceptions. So what are those some of those similarities I saw? Well, as you can understand, the fact that these three so-called continents are definitely underrepresented, with a few exceptions that are, for example, Mexico, Japan, China now, more and more, and perhaps Argentina, Chile, especially in the field of electroacoustic music. I would say that Latin America has often been a bit better represented, especially countries like Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Chile, than most parts of Africa and most parts of Asia, apart from Japan. Why and how? To be honest, I don't have any answer so far. I'm still trying to understand. But I can see a change now. As I mentioned, more and more people will tell you that they know about what happens now in China or step by step, South Korea, Indonesia, Iran, Lebanon, a tiny bit, but it's often connected to a kind of trend, unfortunately, still until now. And people know what happens right now, but not what happened in the past, or very little. From a very, very early time, composers from various places in the world have been traveling to study in the very, very few studios that were available during the 1950s and 60s and 70s, a bit more. And when I speak about some of those composers from the 1950s, 60s, and more, and later, sorry, a lot of people tell me that, yeah, but they went to study in the Netherlands or in France or in Germany or in the USA, like Halim El-Dabh or Ilan Mimaroglu from Turkey. I went to Princeton University. I've got Slamet Abdul Shukur from Indonesia, studied in the Netherlands and in France, and so on. I agree with this, but the fact is that a lot of Western composers also moved from their own city or country to study abroad. Annette van der Gogh, for example, a composer from Belgium in electroacoustic music, went to study during the 1970s in France. And nobody finds that bizarre, but they find that bizarre if a non-Western composer went to study abroad, and this justifies to some people the fact that they think that all the pioneers emerged in Western Europe or Europe in general, and North America, perhaps Australia also they would include, which is wrong to me. I mean, everybody was, a lot of people were just going to the main studios simply because it was very hard to build a studio. It was extremely expensive. This sound art technology was at its infancy as well. So it was not really affordable. So most composers would travel anyway. Another issue I have regarding the lack of documentation is the fact that this documentation has been existing since the 1950s, 60s, but has not always been gathered at in one place. But there are very easy way to prove that it was known that they were composers abroad is simply when you see a composer, for example, like Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, went to perform in Japan during the 1950s, in Lebanon in 1969, went to South Africa also during the 1970s, if I'm not wrong. So obviously he was connected to the people doing electroacoustic music and electronic music and tape music over there. And this has been documented not only on paper, but sometimes filmed, like the performance of Stockhausen in Jetta Grotto in Lebanon in 1969 has been filmed. And this document is available. It's in, you can find it on YouTube. He also, and not only him, if I'm not wrong, François Bale, also from France, went there. He played at Shiraz Festival during the 1960s or 70s in Iran. The Shiraz Festival was a festival for art and poetry and classical and traditional music, but also electroacoustic music. And not only Western composers performed there, but also Dariush Dolachahi, for example, who is a composer from Iran, also presented one piece over there. So those connections existed, still exist, but it's such as if they had been forgotten or put under the carpet. I don't know exactly how and why this happened. And I mentioned this, but on paper also, many facts have been documented. There is a catalogue from the 1960s, and I'm sorry, I completely forgot to write down the references of the catalogue. You can find it on UbuWeb, this website, so UBU. UbuWeb is a fantastic website that documents a lot of poetry and audio and video and art from the Dada period, surrealism, electroacoustic music, and so on. And there you can find this catalog that includes major pieces of electroacoustic and electronic music that have been composed and recorded in various studios across the world during the 1950s and 60s. And in this catalog, you would find many, many names of Latin American and Asian composers too. So those lists exist, those facts exist, those documents exist, but still in the 21st century, it's hard to convince those who have the knowledge in the Western world and beyond, anyway, to update their own documentation. And when they give when you study electroacoustic music, not only in the West, by the way, you will often encounter the classic names, like it's Pierre Schaeffer, Pierre Henry, it's Stockhausen, it's Cage, and a few more, and it's always the same, the pioneers, blah blah blah. But you rarely see all the other names from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And I just wish this to change. And this is a common history again of this these parts of the world that have been, for most of them, colonized. They are still being partly ignored in the history courses, but also in the present. Even though there is a kind of awakening, you find more and more and more residencies and festivals and events that invite contemporary composers from non-Western world. So there is finally an awakening. It took a while, but I wish the history would be really completely updated, because there are so many things missing, so many connections missing, and also to show that this is not new, that composers across Asia, Africa, and Latin America have been active from an early time in the field of sound art and electroacoustic music. Of course, I speak about Asia, Africa, and Latin America, such as if they were entities, global entities, and this is not true. Of course, they all have a different history, some more violent than others, some more difficult than others, with a high or lower level of access to technology. So even if the history there are lots of common facts. There are also a lot of different facts and perspectives. Also, I mentioned that I sound a bit like blaming the West all the time, but of course, I guess a lot of regions are self-centered. It's not only about the West. If 15 or 20 years ago, I was in China mentioning that I knew composers from, say, South Africa or Egypt, or even Vietnam, who do electroacoustic music, most people would be also surprised. They would know about what happens in China and or, of course, Japan, maybe South Korea. But most of the history they would know, the past and the present, would be centered around China and, as I mentioned, a bit Japan and so on, and the West, but not most of the other neighbors. And I think it's pretty similar with Africa. When in Africa, I tell, yeah, there is this composer in Mozambique, and there is this composer in Kenya. Most of the time, people tell me, oh, we are not aware of this, but they know what happens in Europe and North America, for example, which is another big problem to me. That leads me to the importance of networking. And of course, we are very well connected in the Western world and throughout Latin America, more and more in most parts, I would say, not all of them. I have to admit that I never managed to come across anything related to electroacoustic music coming from Guyana or Suriname or the French Guiana as well. But these are very few exceptions, I think. And the same applies to parts of Asia, where there are more and more connections between countries such as South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, China, Indonesia, the Philippines. So networks are being developed with or without connections with the West. And the fact that some of the networks are more centered to Asian studies is, to me, also very important to reappropriate their own history of sound art and electroacoustic music, such as with Tal Farah's work and his database in Latin America to show how rich this history is. And unfortunately, regarding Africa, apart from the database that I'm running, that is very basic, this Asian and African database, I still haven't seen any collective work database regarding electroacoustic music and sound art. There are networks and collectives mostly oriented to so-called dance music, whatever it is, from techno to singeli to hip hop to kwaito, kuduro, and so on and so forth. And you've got big efforts from some collectives and labels like the Hakuna Kulala and Nyege Nyege in East Africa and Uganda, in fact, for example. But again, mostly, not exclusively, but mostly dance-oriented. And that is, to me, a big difference, I would say, between Asia, Africa, and Latin America, is that while there are studies dedicated to electroacoustic music and sound art in Latin America and from Latin America, and in and from East Southeast Asia especially, there is a cruel lack of it in the whole African continent, with tiny exceptions, perhaps South Africa and parts of North Africa. I think that regarding North Africa, it's thanks to the fact that there is a shared culture with the Middle East, West Asia, as you wish to name it, and a kind of unity regarding the history of, or several histories of the region and the connections. But I speak a lot, and I'm going to play a few music extracts because I'm not sure that everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about regarding history of electroacoustic and sound art and so on and so forth. So I'm going to play a few music extracts, not necessarily all the time the whole pieces, because we don't have time for this, but just to prove a bit my point, I will play a few pretty old pieces by Halim El-Dabba, so in 1944 in Egypt, by Reginaldo Carvalho from Brazil in 1956, Makoto Moroi and Toshiro Mayuzumi from Japan also in 1956, Hilda Dianda from Argentina in 1959, Ali Reza Mashayekhi from Iran in 1966. If I remember well the date, I just hope I did not make any mistake. It was 69. Oh, sorry. Jose Maceda from the Philippines in 1973. Natila Zvanice from 1974 in Georgia, back then the Soviet Union, of course. Jingjing Luo in 1987 and 8 from China. And Slamet Abdul Shukur from Indonesia, a piece from 1982. But Abdul Shukur was a composer who started in the 1960s to play mostly contemporary classical music in Indonesia, Indonesian and Western classical music, but also tape music and experimental music. So I'm going to play those very few extracts first, and then we can go a bit further. I'm going to share the screen, and I hope I don't make any mistake. So it's present. No, not this one. Screen and this. Okay, normally you should be able to see everything. If there is a problem, please tell me.
Sorry, Cédric.
Yes.
The sound is not coming through.
Okay. Let me start again. I'm sharing audio. Oh, that's weird. We tried earlier today. Okay, maybe if I do this. Oh yeah. Okay, now it should work. It's my fault, I think. Okay. So we start with. Oh gosh. I'm trying to click on the. Can I get it? Oh man. Can I move this? Oh, cool. Okay. So first Halim El-Dabha, a piece that has been renamed Wire Recorder Piece. That is an extract of a much longer piece that has been apparently lost. So this composition is from 1944 in Cairo, Egypt. So tell me if you don't hear anything. Normally now it should work. from 1956. And the next one, Makoto Moroi and Toshiro Mayuzumi, same year, 1956, in Japan. From Argentina, 1959. We go a bit further in the piece. He in Iran, 19, if I'm not wrong, 66, but I may have to correct this later. I forgot to write down the date. and Jose Maceda in the Philippines in 1973. From the Soviet Union, Georgia in 1974. Oops, sorry. The 1988 from China. And Slamet Abdul Shukur in 1983 from Indonesia. All right, I will stop for now. If we have time a bit later, I've got 5 more pieces, but composed in the 2000s by composers from Morocco, Kenya, Iraqi Kurdistan, Sri Lanka, and China. But we will see if we have um, time or not for this. um, so yeah, I wanted to present those those pieces to show that not only are they interesting, but there are traces from the past that exist, and there are a lot of them. These are no exceptions. And I think there is slowly an awakening from the West that doesn't systematically present those composers and pieces as oddities, but a normality like any other composers. Um, it was about time, I must say, uh, but it's still a long struggle to really get a certain level of recognition for many of those composers. And I think one of the current biases that all these regions share, or almost all, and maybe not all, in common, it comes directly from the media. It is obvious that when um, newspapers or news on the internet or on TV, on the radio, speak about some part of the world, like, say, Iraq or Lebanon, Iran, or China or Colombia, um, most of the time, these are negative aspects of these countries. It's the war, it's the famine, it's the corruption, the failure of the state, and so on and so forth. But it's very rarely, these are very rarely the positive aspects of those countries, the cultural aspects, the what is happening right now, culturally speaking, in those countries, and what are the analogies between those countries and the rest of the world. We live in a global world for, well, depending on how you see it, at least 500 years. We could even decide it's more than that. But the West and some other parts of the world still exclude many parts of Asia and Africa, seeing them as poor and corrupted and problematic and at war. And therefore, the the modern cultural content is often not shared. What is shared is often the traditional content. Hence, I still get comments sometimes from people who tell me they are surprised to hear the music I play, because they think that in, say, the DRC, the Congo, there is only traditional music, or that in Iran, all forms of contemporary music are being suppressed or forbidden. Or we know about electro cumbia from Argentina, but we never think that there are people also doing sound art and electroacoustic music in those places. Which is really a pity when we have this fantastic tool that is the internet, where everything or almost everything is accessible pretty easily there, not only through the database of Dalfara or Sirf, the database I'm running, but it's almost everywhere on social networks, on Bandcamp, on SoundCloud, on YouTube, on Vimeo, and so on and so forth, for the ones who really want to look for something. So it still drives me a bit mad, I must say, when I hear people telling me that that they are encountering difficulties to find artists from many of those regions, because the information is there. It's not very difficult to find it on an average. I don't deny the fact that for some parts of the world, either the documentation is hard to come across, or is barely existent, or there are very, very few composers, or simply the composers are not being represented online. Hence, for years I've been also traveling. For me, it's very important not only to interact with people online, but also to meet the people in their own context. But also because if you go on site, you might always, sometimes totally randomly, come across somebody who would tell, "Yes, I know somebody there, who does this, that." And again, this is a shared, a common point between many parts of Asia, Latin America, and Africa. The fact that well, maybe a bit less in East Southeast Asia now, and Latin America, that many people are not have a little or non-existent presence online. Therefore, again, in the Western and other countries, places, people think that because there is nothing online, nothing happens there, which is, of course, completely wrong. There are obviously composers and musicians who also do sound and sonic experimentations in places where sharing on the internet is not widespread or difficult. It's not because we can't see it that it doesn't exist. And this is also a problem with this Western vision of we don't see it, so it might probably not exist. Of course not. Not everybody is connected to the internet, or not everybody wants to share, or other people might also share on their own networks. Unfortunately, I don't know regarding Latin America, apart from, again, the Latin American electronic music database of Dalfarra. But I noticed that in Africa, for example, and in the Arab world, there are some very specific networks that connect people from some regions that the West doesn't always know. So you've got, for example, Mid-East tunes that connects North Africa and, West Asia. All sorts of music. It's from mainstream R&B to electroacoustic music. You've got Quito in East Asia, which is in Swahili and English, that also gathers artists from the region, especially the Swahili language region, so to speak. And similar to Mid-East tunes, it's from more mainstream music, Afro house and so on, to more experimental sounds and music. So those documents exist and should be also listed and more represented. Sorry. Okay, wow, it's already 4. Okay, I'm sorry. If anyone has to make any comment or question, you can do it now, and then I can go a bit further into the talk and the discussion, and maybe play some extracts if we can. But maybe before that, okay, somebody wrote something, but Okay, is there anyone who wants to make any comment or ask any question now, or should I go further?
Moment, Cédric, we are getting questions from YouTube.
All right, okay.
We have a comment on YouTube yet. Reginaldo Carvalho was actually was the first director of our institution, the Instituto Villa Lobos. So he was an avant-garde composer and also a pedagogue, musician, and wrote a lot for choral, for chores, and was very important. He was his work was shut down in the coup d'état,
Yeah, of course.
1969, actually. And well, but he was a very important composer. Many other electroacoustic composers from Brazil get information from his approach. Many others, Marlene Fernandes, Jorge Antunes, Rodolfo Caesa, you know. Well, I'm asking people, okay, that's Michael's. Can you read?
Yeah. Once you've noted this lack of documentation about the history of the electronic music, how do you think the scientific community could help solve this problem? Well, by sharing knowledge. And this is a big issue, I must say. What I do is I have this database that is very primitive. It's a huge list of names sorted out by countries, alphabetical order. But that database is accessible online for free, like the database of Dalfara. The names and biographies are for free. Many of the pieces can be listened and downloaded for free. Otherwise, you need to apply and register, as far as I know. And I think one of the issues here is the difficulty to share, especially from many universities. So, for example, you've got an Asian study a department at the Beijing University, at the Beijing Conservatory in China. They document a lot what happens and what happened in Taiwan, in China, in South Korea, Japan, in Malaysia, and Singapore, for example. Not the whole East and Southeast Asia, unfortunately. But how do you access this knowledge? Because those publications are often locked behind a paywall, and it's so typical from many universities. So either people just download this, well, let's say illegally. It's not a word I appreciate in that case, but so, or they are students or teachers there who can access this information. And this is not only typical from this department that is connected to the Sorbonne in France, in fact. This is typical from many publications. And as you know, I write also some essays, and some of the essays I wrote were published in magazines or books that were free or cheap or accessible online, but some not, and some are insanely expensive. And to me, this is also a problem. So to answer your question, the scientific community should simply stop selling information for a huge amount of money. I understand we all have to pay our rent, our food, and so on, but this is a bit ridiculous if you do a research and you want to share knowledge, but you sell that knowledge that speaks about communities that cannot afford to access this knowledge. It's a bit pointless. You're just running in circle. So I think the universities and scientific communities should share much more. And it's not only about a history of electroacoustic music, it's everything, basically. I think this kind of information could benefit everyone, the whole humanity, I guess. So it should be easily accessible, maybe not always free, it doesn't matter. But as an example, we Dimitri de la Faye and I published a book, as mentioned earlier, and we decided to publish it by ourselves to make sure that the book would be accessible at a very low price, and that a free PDF version of the book would be accessible, because we all know that not everybody can afford to pay this. So this is, I think, the only way. And universities should also share more information and not just keep things well, a bit secret in the end. And I think there should be also more connections between those regions I'm mentioning, Latin America, Africa, and Asia, because what I saw is that it's often just going to the Western world. So you've got composers in Brazil who know about the composers from Brazil and I guess Argentina, Mexico, and they know about the Western composers, but they're rarely in touch with composers from Africa or from Asia, even though there again it's changing a bit. And you've got works by Victor Gama, for example, who is a composer, musician and instrument builder from Angola, who has collaborated a lot also with musicians from Lusophone countries, like in Brazil also, or even musicians from Cuba as well. But this is an individual initiative. This is not a university or a cultural center that decided to do this. So we often speak about decolonizing, and it's a theme that is really trendy nowadays. But in the end, a lot of universities and in science the same, still have this colonialist mentality of keeping information and just sharing bits sometimes, or sharing only against money, which is to me a shame. These barriers should be broken. So if individuals who can access this information can share it, to me it's very, very important. And this is why I'm as I mentioned, I share a lot for free, because this situation has to change, and we should all work together. In fact, we should all collaborate together.
Cédric, concerning that, it's not a question, it's a commentary about that. I believe more and more people in Europe are interested in art around the world. I've been just now, I come back from the Cassius Documenta, which was a huge exposition about the art around the world, especially in the South world. But the impression I came from there is, well, the ticket was very expensive. It's hard to be there, and well, the information is it's somehow gathering into the same spot from all those art activities in the world. So again, maybe we have an empowerment. People know institutions with more power can collect information, and they getting money from that. So what you're saying is very important for us. But in other way, I can say we are lack of empowerment. We are less. We have less power than these huge institutions in Europe and United States. But you know,
It is true. The thing is that, especially in Europe, in some parts of Europe, like in Germany, if you speak about Kassel, but also in France, for example, there is a lot of money for culture. And this is partly the case for some Asian countries. There is money, for culture in Taiwan, in Japan, in South Korea, in China to a certain extent, depending on what. But many other parts of the world have less or no funding from the state and institutions. So either it comes from private institutions, or it doesn't come at all, which is not empowering people there. They often rely, unfortunately, then on the West again and again and again. And this should be also broken. But how can you do when you don't have the money? You can't always be DIY, do it yourself. I mean, unfortunately, things cost a lot of money. Again, with the internet, it changes a lot, like what we are doing now. Fortunately, not everybody has access to internet. I know this, but on an average, it's pretty widespread, and we can drastically reduce the cost and organize what you are doing now, such exchange and talks. So one of the tendencies could be simply to, as much as we can, work online. It's not perfect, but this is a possibility, because that doesn't cost the ten of thousands of euros or more that a huge exhibition might cost. And we could also do exchange knowledge online, and make exhibitions online, make concerts online. I really insist. To me, it's not ideal, but if we have no other options, it's better than nothing. In fact, and we cannot also always let the West speak about non-Western countries. I'm not one of those who say that the West should have no rights at all. I think everybody has the right to speak about other people, but we all of us, we have our own biases, and I have my own biases when I write about um, Asian culture, even though it's been almost 20 years that I often go there, and I spend sometimes months there. I know I was not born there, so I have my own biases and mistakes and so on. But then we need to collaborate with people. And what I admire with some of these countries, especially with Indonesia, and the people at Castle, the team was from Indonesia, is their activism in sharing knowledge and documenting also their own culture and cultures, and trying to decolonize the art world, and the studies and so on. I think it's still a long way, unfortunately. We have to do a lot of work, but we need to all collaborate together, and not always have the Western world dictating something, or thinking, okay, we should open and do this, that, which is happening across Asia, for example, where you have independent networks, or networks connected to institutions. You have a Far East Network, for example, that is more a musical project between composers from Singapore, South Korea, Japan, and China, collaborating with guests from other places, from Vietnam or from Indonesia, for example, but that don't rely on Western money and tools, which is to me important. We should not exclude, but it's also important to have network that are being developed outside of the Western perspective. And when I say Western, it's really Western Europe mostly, and North America, perhaps Australia and New Zealand, because Eastern Europe, even though it has joined more or less the Western world since the fall of socialism, the Eastern Bloc, whatever you name it, is still not fully included, in fact. Due to cultural factors and historical factors, and also due to maybe history that is not always a continuum. And that leads me to what you mentioned about Brazil and the coup. That is another issue with some non-Western countries. While in most Western countries, we can often see a continuum in the history of sound art and electroacoustic music. I say mostly, it's not always. It's not always the case in some other parts of the world. Like there was the coup in 1969 in the military coup in Brazil, but you had the coup in Iran, sorry, by the end of the 1970s, that completely wiped out a potential future for building electroacoustic music studios and so on and so forth until the years 2000. Now it has changed a lot, but in between there was a kind of emptiness, and this is valid for many other parts of the world. And so that history is then fragmented. It needs more research, more effort to join the pieces. And I think a lot of the people over there could work on it also, and not only people from the West. Yeah.
All right. Pedro, do you have? Oh, here it is. Another question. Can you read?
Yeah. What do you think are the best strategies to spread and popularize this unknown sound art, publish in Europe to confront them with the existence of our music? Well, I think we should publish everywhere, but one main issue I would say is the language. What is the language you choose? I've chosen English because it became an international language, but I'm not ignoring that not everybody speaks English, and this is a language of the colonizers as well. So what else can I choose? French, it's also a language of colonizer. Spanish, Arabic, Chinese is difficult. So I think not only we should share as much as possible, but we should translate also. And I must say that unfortunately, I don't have a lot of translations of my work. It's only in very, very few languages. And I realized that I had a hard time to share some of my knowledge with Latin America because nothing has been written in Spanish or Portuguese, the major languages there. And I could see in the past in the stats of the visits of some of my websites that as much I had visitors from China, for example, or from Egypt, there were very, very few from Latin America. So I think one important thing would be that we would be able to translate in various of the major languages, so to speak. We can't translate in everything, but it would be amazing if we could translate in Spanish, in Swahili, in Japanese, in Chinese, in Arabic, in Russian, and so on and so forth. This is one of the many difficulties I came across. Also for me to find documents that have been written sometimes a long time ago, but in a language I absolutely can't read and understand. Hence the importance of not only that we should collaborate all together, but we should try to translate as much as possible in some of the major languages, even though we all know that most of those languages are part of the colonization process, and not only the Western colonization anyway. Yeah, I hope I answer more or less your question.
I think your answer is a clue for our own community, maybe to translate your own work.
Mm. Mm, mm, mm.
Yeah. Okay, Pedro, do you have? Olga has a question. Olga, somehow I'm going to translate her question. I think her question is about to spread the idea that electroacoustic music is formally genre uh, um, very close to people who is inside the genre. I mean, it's very connected to the avant-garde and also with the European countries. And well, we've already talked about that before, and but I will maybe try to put out on this. What do you think um, about the separation academic works, academic thinking do with electroacoustic, noise, sound art, etc., and so on? That's what we learned in the institutions and the technology that was created in the north. What do you think about
Mm,
that?
mm.
What's your opinion?
There's still a huge gap in most countries between the independent scene or scenes and um, the academic scene. I guess it's the same in Brazil. It's the same in Belgium. It's the same in China. In China is very deep. This gap, for example, um, but it is changing. We see more and more young people who might be playing techno, but also electroacoustic music, and they're building bridges. I think it's step by step changing in some environments. It's not everywhere. Of course, there is still this academic world that thinks that has this pretty pretentious view of being the scientific world and knowing better and doing better, which is not always the case. And I find it interesting to see that so many academic electroacoustic pieces are not original at all. They all copy each other, use the same tools, and sometimes I can even recognize, hey, it's done with this software, it's done with this technique, and so on. While the independent scenes can be sometimes richer, not systematically, of course. Um, and I think it's interesting to have a step in both worlds. To see and sense how it works, but also to tell that we all are working on taking the same tracks, basically, more or less. That one is valuable and the other one as well. And of course, if we go back in the past, um, electroacoustic music, music concrete, and so on were purely academic because it was connected to technology, technology that partly came from the war, basically, like the tape player, for example. Um, and not everyone could access this technology. It was way too much money. But now more people can access this technology. More people can access the knowledge to build their own instruments or get a very cheap computer and free softwares to make music. And the result can be as interesting as what an academic electroacoustic composer does. Um, Again, because we share a lot of knowledge online, so people can be self-taught nowadays. But unfortunately, yes, this gap still exists, and that sends us back to this problem of this paywall with many academies and universities where the knowledge is not shared easily or properly. How can we break this? That is a bit of a mystery because it doesn't only depend on us. If people don't want to share, what can we do? Then either we steal the knowledge and we reshare it, and people complain about it, or we create our own perspectives, our own um, documentation, and we share it between us, but with other people, and maybe step by step that will melt. I mean, inside the academia, also more and more researchers and professors are complaining about this lack of transparency, this lack of shared knowledge. So it might change maybe one day or another. Unfortunately, it's very slow. I can't really fully answer. I just think that we need to keep doing what we are doing now, sharing knowledge and yeah, build our own networks and render people visible also, because it's obvious that I meet a lot of people who are not part of the academia, who don't know so much about academic compositions, and the other way around as well. Lots of academics who've never heard about composers who are not part of the academic world. And I think we should try to also organize more gatherings and festivals, events, exhibitions, where the academic world and the independent world meet and exchange. I think is very important. And we see that more and more in Germany, for example, where I live.
All right. Well, I think we are in time. There's maybe we have time for a last question. Yes, Pedro, can you?
Are there any festivals in Europe or elsewhere which regularly program these early non-European electroacoustic composers? Well, I can't answer your question, but I've never seen any. I mean, if we speak about contemporary composers, yes, I know there are plenty, especially in Germany, in France. You see more and more festivals programming with the new young composers, but the old ones. Yeah, there is maybe a festival that happened in Paris a few times. I forgot the name of it. But that is it's an oddity. It's an independent festival, not connected to any university, but that programs really academic electroacoustic music. And I know the organizer asked me already to try to get in touch with Alireza Mashayekhi from Iran, for example. He wanted to program something from him. And I'm pretty sure some festivals have programmed a few of these pioneers. There is, but this is not in Europe in that case, Unyazi Festival in South Africa. They invited Halim El-Dab, the pioneer of electroacoustic music in Egypt, from Egypt, to perform there. It's at least 10 years ago. But it was one composer. I mean, all the other composers were from new generations. Also, let's face it, many of these composers have passed away nowadays. There is also CTM Festival in Berlin that is that programs everything from more alternative dance music to electroacoustic music and noise music. They invited some Indonesian composers, and one of them was a composer from the 1970s and 80s. Let me check quickly because I completely forgot who they invited, but I could possibly tell you. Well, we don't have so much time for this, but I know that it's one of the very few festivals that invited one of the pioneers from Indonesia. There could be some, but these are more exceptions than the norm. Apart from electroacoustic festival from the GRM festival, for example. Of course, they have invited a few of the pioneers now and then, but I've never seen a festival really completely dedicated to pioneers of the non-Western world. That would be interesting to set up, or at least to present some of the pieces. Sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Cédric. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for getting all those ideas and sounds for us here.
Thank you too a lot.
Yeah, hope to meet you soon around
Hopefully,
the world.
yeah.
You're always traveling. You say you're in Berlin, but normally you're not.
Yeah, I'm not so often there this year. That's a clear fact. Yeah. Yeah. Still doing this ongoing research, and I want to say that if someone has more questions, you can just drop me a line. You send me an email if you want, or if you want to share something, or if you want to have more links or whatever, feel free to contact me. I'm sometimes a bit slow to answer, but I always answer at some point.
Yeah, maybe it's a good idea to gather, to put people together and maybe translate
Yeah,
some of your works, and we can try
yeah,
to spread
it's
your
yeah,
works around here in our journal. We have a journal in the university as well.
yeah,
And,
yeah, definitely. Anyway, I'm supposed to write down what I said today, but I'm a bit slow regarding this. Dimitri, by the way, with whom I collaborated, is writing about Mexico because he's been a lot in Latin America and he speaks Spanish as well. So he's one of the many people documenting a bit the region, in fact.
okay, and maybe next time we'll be together in Brazil, not
Who
online, but
knows? Yeah,
in
well, who knows? Would be nice.
all right. Can Olga is asking, can we you share your email in YouTube on the page or
um,
not? Maybe, but
Why? I guess my email is everywhere, so I guess it's
all right.
okay. Or just share maybe the website.
The website maybe is better
Maybe
idea.
a bit better, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, Cedric. Thank you very much. I'm glad
Um,
having you.
Obrigado.
De nada. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.